I think a founder needs to experience that. They need to experience the pain and the suffering and the joy and everything that goes into running these businesses. Because if you start a business by running it, through profit and loss statements and marketing strategies and all this other stuff, those are all important. But the business is one transaction at a time.
We're live. Erik, thank you so much for joining me here today on the show. I am so excited for this episode. Not only am I a huge fan of your work, of Tender Greens, and also what you're working on today, I'm just really stoked to hear how you got into this crazy business. So for my audience that doesn't know you, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into this world and maybe some things you're currently working on today?
Yeah, I mean, I fell in love with hospitality while I was in college and wanted to travel, wanted to really control my own destiny. And food seemed like a universal language. And one thing about food is you can go where the people are, where they're hungry, and no matter what happens, and we've been through a lot of chaotic times, people need to eat, whether that's at the luxury level or at the impact level. So it's been a great journey. And after college, I went to culinary school and then made my way out to California and spent a lot of time out there, Northern California, as a chef. Really sort of immersed in the local food scene there through the 90s, and then moved to LA to run Shutters on the Beach, and then eventually started Tender Greens in 2006.
Amazing. I think Northern California is the place to be. I'm calling from San Francisco and I went to school up in Berkeley. So being around Alice Waters and all the farmers markets and the slow food movement, I think this is a place where a lot of great ideas come up with and a lot of great chefs kind of gravitate toward this authentic and non-pretentious way of consuming food. What was that early early unlock that you and your founders saw that gave you guys the idea to go after Tender Greens?
Yeah, we were at Shutters on the Beach, which is a luxury boutique hotel in Santa Monica, and we all had the same career pedigree. Four Seasons, Mandarin Oriental, a lot of independent restaurants, but always catering to the let's call it the 1% or so, special occasion restaurants. And we saw a landscape in Los Angeles in the early 2000s that was bifurcated. It was, the world of Wolfgang Puck and Joachim Spichel at the high end, and a lot of like well-financed, big concept restaurants that were very expensive and often hard to get into, not always great. And then, sort of this fast food nation culture that was not particularly interesting. And because we were living in Santa Monica, we didn't, there weren't a lot of the mom and pops because the rents were too high. So you had to really drive quite a bit to get to anything really cool and authentic. So we saw an opportunity to create something that filled that gap and leveraged the commitment to local organic agriculture that we had always supported. And some of those partners, and then obviously the passion and attention to detail to creating something delicious out of those ingredients, but also in a format that was accessible. Food that was relatable, that people knew already, just with better ingredients and better technique and way better prices. A speed of service that accommodated busy lifestyles, and approach to food that was inherently healthy, but we weren't doing a health food concept. We made no promise of any sort of dietary claims or ambitions, but really sort of this California Mediterranean diet or lifestyle, which is, plant forward, and fresh and vibrant, nothing processed. And the other part to it on the business side was we created a company called TYP Restaurant Group, which stands for 10-year plan. And that was, I think, key to our success because we laid out a vision and a timeline, and we're clear on what our destination was. And it was a promise to investors, to grow something of value. There was a clear timeline to it, so it created a culture of patience, and then it also, we were pretty clear on our values and what we stood for, what mattered, what didn't, and that guided us through every decision and every aspect of the business. So when you have a long-term vision that is clear to everybody, and you can align everybody around that vision and agree on how long it's going to take, then you can really just march everybody in the same direction and say, this is where we're headed. If you're into it, come along, and we'll find a role for you to play. And then every day you go out and you work towards that goal.
It's very disciplined of you. And I'm sure for the people that you brought in, you had to really make sure that they were aligned on that same vision, whether it was your partners or whether it was the employees or the executive chefs that ran each of the different tender greens. How did you guys go about that process of figuring out the types of people you want to bring into your brand?
I would say that it was values alignment, and mission ambition, if you will, and for the most part, we were drawing from people we knew and had worked with before. So we understood their capabilities. They knew our leadership style and the culture that we've created, had created in other places. So there wasn't really a learning curve. We brought in people who we had a language with, and also a promise to take care of one another. That we would look after the business, but we would also look after each other's, and make sure that everybody stayed balanced and healthy, and growing, and when needed, accountable as well.
Was there ever a moment throughout the time you were leading Tender Greens that you were presented with an opportunity that maybe allowed you guys to accelerate your growth, but it would come at the cost of maybe going against one of those values, whether it was growing methodically or bringing in outside capital or maybe even changing the concept to accommodate a wider market? Was there any decisions that you had to make along the way that could have tested that thesis that you guys laid out?
Yeah, probably we call it the expensive fish dinner meeting. We had been maybe in the probably the fourth or fifth year, we were starting to have conversations with private equity, mostly inbound. They were coming to us. We weren't seeking investment from private equity, but we always looked at it as sort of broader market insights. We could get kind of free consulting because they're looking at a lot of businesses around the country, and it gave us a sense of where we fit in. And it also educated us on the language of that space and what they were looking for.
What did they label you as? Sorry for interrupting.
Well, I suppose, at that time, everybody was getting lumped into fast casual. We were a regional disruptor, I guess, is what they would consider us. Better for you. There were a bunch of labels. And this is when, what we were doing was really kind of throwing off casual dining, traditional fast food, even some of the incumbents like Panera and Chipotle were taking notice, and we went as far with Catterton to get a term sheet, and it was at a time when we were feeling a bit of founders fatigue. I remember we went to Capo in Santa Monica, which was just behind Shutters on the Beach, And because we were coming from different parts of LA, me, Matt, and David each parked, and we parked it at the promenade and walked over because we could get free validated parking. And I share that because, we were broke. I mean, the business was thriving, but personally, everything was going back into the business. So I think it's one of the things that people don't understand about entrepreneurship. Even if you're successful, the first 4 or 5 years are brutal, especially if you're growing. So we were starting to feel as though, it might be nice to take a little money off the table and also get a shot in the arm, so we weren't raising money every time we wanted to open a restaurant, that we have a better runway. But when it really came down to it, and they handed us the term sheet to read after dinner, we looked at it, and they wanted total control. The valuation was insulting, and we basically said no, a hard, kind of a hard no, and that relationship ended. I think 2 or 3 weeks later, Mario DePiro of Mendocino Farms called me and said, "Thanks for passing on Catterton. We're going to do a
I
deal
see
with them."
God. Yeah,
And
that's right.
for a little while, I had, I think we all had a little regret. Mario got a nice, expensive watch and bought a bigger house in the valley, and we were still, I was still in a 1 bedroom apartment with an old Beetle with one headlight. Um, so we just went back to, the grind. But what we learned there was private equity isn't what we're looking for. So we're going to just put our heads down and keep doing what we've been doing and stay very much in control. And that's what we did.
Thanks for sharing that. Seriously, thank you for your honesty there, because I know Mario's story, and that was a very pivotal moment in his journey with scaling Mendo. So I'm sure everything worked out for the best. When did you know it was time for you to exit the brand that you built from the ground up?
Well, it came after let's say the liquidity event. So because our promise to our investors and ourselves was, that 10-year plan, really. And the ninth year, we started to look for that vehicle, and had sort of decided not to go the private equity route, and look for strategics. Panera had approached us, and we were developing a relationship with them. Cheesecake Factory, the leadership there, was looking at brands like us, and then, Union Square Hospitality Group came up, and Danny Meyer, and we sort of put pencils down and focused on that. So we did the deal with Danny. And then as part of that, it wasn't just Union Square Hospitality Group. It was also Alliance Consumer Growth, which is a private equity firm with whom we didn't have a relationship with, didn't know much about, and didn't pay a lot of attention, I would say, until after the deal was done. I decided to step aside 3 years after the deal, and at the end of 2018, because truthfully, it wasn't fun anymore. There was a lot of pressure to, expand to New York. We did that, but that created a lot of strain. It took us out of our comfort zone, and then there were some other, moves that I regret, that if, I were to do it all over again, I'd do it differently. But at the time we were trying to make the best decisions with, the new guidance that we had, and it changed the dynamic of our team, at the founder level and all the way through. And 3 years into it, I was just not having fun. Yeah, I would say I wasn't having fun leading up to that, but I finally said I need to go do something else, and stepped aside, stayed on the board, but stepped aside from day to day and started thinking about what I was going to do next.
What was that? What did you get yourself into? And I think as you answer that, this is a tough thing for me after I quit my first startup. That 2 years afterwards was just really, really difficult. I felt extremely bored. I had to go work in corporate to pay the bills, and I felt like felt like I wasn't really following my true calling, but it did teach me a lot. I feel like I grew in those 2 years. So tell me, after leaving, what did you get yourself into, and what are you working on now?
I dabbled for a year or two in a bunch of things, just trying to understand where I wanted to place a lot of my energy. And you're right, it took a year or two at least to go through that identity shift, because when you create something, it's so much part of who you are, and then you change it, and it takes a minute to scramble into something that feels right. I met my now wife and business partner Antoinette Johnson, who had a branding and marketing firm out of Philly, and mostly in urban redevelopment, restaurants, hospitality, and that was an area that I was particularly, I would say, weak. We were the opposite of Sweetgreen. We didn't have an advertising budget. We didn't have a marketing budget. We did some PR, but it just wasn't something that we built any muscle around. And I was skeptical of anything that was, advertising or marketing in the restaurant space. But Antoinette, we ended up. It was like our strengths and weaknesses, not just in her brilliance in branding and marketing, but also just personality type. We worked really well together. So I joined Cohere to really build the call it the advisory or consulting side, less on branding and marketing, but more on the all the things that back it up. Meaning, you can go represent a brand and say a lot of things, but so many people only do that, and then you go to you experience that product or service, and nothing is further from the truth. So I really work with founders to ensure that whatever their aspirations are, their intentions, that we're systematizing it, that we're building it into the culture, building it in to the decision making process, building it into the product and the supply chain, um, and and really just getting the engineering right, so that when the creative team talks about it, they're saying something that's true, and we feel good about it.
That's brilliant. I think that so often brands tend to either explode through the hype and through the marketing and through the social media buzz, and then fail in delivering a quality product and continuously bringing people back to their restaurant. But then you also have I mean, as you were alluding to, I think that you guys built an amazing brand, but maybe you were weak on the marketing and the social media, which is extremely important, especially in today's climate, where every single customer is looking for an experience and looking to connect with the brand on a deeper level. So I love that the two of you, no pun intended, married your two skill sets together and made something extremely beautiful. When you work with a founder and they sit down in front of you, they have these ambitions. They want to take their brand to 100 stores. What are the types of what's the type of guidance that you give them, or maybe some adages or some of your own flair that you got from your experience? What do you coach them on from a operation side to make sure that they actually build a brand that scales and is able to succeed in the long term?
Yeah, I mean, it's great to have long term ambitions and a long term plan, and to feel relatively confident and honest, um, about your ability to achieve that, particularly if you're bringing on outside capital. But once you do that, once you sort of set the course, I am very, very intense around reminding entrepreneurs, ambitious entrepreneurs, that they have to get the first one right, and then the second one, and then the third one, and the fourth one. And I've seen a lot of founders, particularly the ones who come out of business school, who have a really buttoned up deck, The whole concept makes sense, but they're already in the headspace of, founder CEO of 150 units, and there's a long road to get there. And if you don't learn how to what it's like to mop the floor at 12:30 at night after service, or be the first one to open the restaurant and see what it smells like after the night cleaners are in, or after it's been beaten down a bit, or work a busy service when the POS system, goes down because you lost Wi-Fi, or, a Sunday service when the hot water heater goes out. All of these things that happen to every restaurant. I think a founder needs to experience that. They need to experience the pain and the suffering and the joy, and everything that goes into running these businesses. Because if you start a business by running it, through profit and loss statements and marketing strategies and all this other stuff, those are all important. But the business is one transaction at a time, and that's, it's one interaction with at a time with your team to build culture. It's one interaction at a time with your guests to build a brand and stickiness, and a brand that people love. And it's iteration real time to refine and make things better, despite having laid out great SOPs and recipes and formulas and blah blah blah. All of that matters, but there's no substitution for just rolling up your sleeve and working in the business with always, a plan to work on the business, right? But you do have to spend some time in the business, and that's not 2 weeks. It's 2 or 3 years, really building it from the ground up. If you don't do that, I think you fail.
Seems like those conversations turn into more of maybe a therapy session, or um, an omen, at least, to make sure that they understand what they're getting themselves into. And as as I've been a first time founder myself, and I graduated from business school as well, and I came prepared with all those fancy decks and a vision. And it got me the funding, but where I failed was in the execution and actually making a business that scaled and that worked properly. And as I've gotten older and have had more experience, I do sort of cringe when people come prepared with a fancy slide deck, because I know that it really just comes down to, are you hungry enough, and do you have enough insight into that industry that gives you an unfair advantage? And maybe in your case was, you had the experience coming in and being an executive chef, so you knew how to work a line and you knew how to coach a team and you knew how prime cost works, but you found something that truly aligned with your values across your three partners, across the two other partners. And I think that's what perhaps made it very special, that you laid out that plan, but you stuck to it, and it was in line with what you believed in.
Yeah, we never wavered, and because it was the three of us, if one of us went off the rails with some stupid idea or pet project, you always had the other two to kind of reel you in and say, "Not now." And I was on both ends of those conversations. So, and we all were, and we had a relationship around equity. So each of us had the same vote. We from the very beginning, we were kind of like brothers in a sense. There was even a weird pecking order, and we were just honest. We were blatantly honest with one another, with the utmost compassion and heart and belief that we were being tough because we cared. But we also had an agreement from the very beginning, and it carried us all the way through, that the business comes first, friendship's second, and no hard feeling. It's business. And it sort of kept us very serious and very focused and very much aligned. Even those times when we fell out of alignment, we auto corrected pretty quickly.
For the final segment, I want to talk about your new project with I don't even know what we can call it, but the bathhouse, the third space, just a really cool idea around how can we bring more people into a space where they can heal themselves and they can connect. And how do you kind of bring this into a wider market? As someone that's Russian, I grew up in this culture, something I love. I'm probably the only one out of my friends that goes to a bathhouse at least a couple times a month. But for the my audience that has never been to a bathhouse before, why should they go? And what is that unique insight that you found after exploring this space that made you want to explore in it and build in it?
Hey, I'll take one step back and say that, something that we've evolved into with Cohere is fractional entrepreneurship. So we've now really started to take 1 to 2 equity partnerships a year, where we are brought in for one thing or the other, and then feel pretty strongly about both the founder's capability and the concept's uniqueness and timing. And Grotto, which is a social bathhouse. For those who don't know anything about bathhouses, they're kind of laid out like spas. You've got pool, and then you've got different ways to experience water, in different various temperatures, from extreme heat, and if you go to a Russian spa, it's going to be very hot. And then cold, cold plunge has become super trendy. And so this idea of contrast therapy. So there's a functional component to it, which is, water has healing properties, and, there are certain techniques, and then you get into ceremonia, afghash, and breathing and other things, breath work. So we're drawing from, bathing culture from around the world, and then also acknowledging that a big component that's missing in spas, to some degree, maybe even gyms, is this social component, at a time when a lot of people are looking for alternative ways to gather, um, and gather where maybe there's not this pressure to order a cocktail, or they just want to be in a place, where it feels a little bit more regenerative. And we also believe that, there's, since COVID, there's been this crisis of isolation, loneliness, and we want to find a way, for people to gather in a place that feels safe, healthy, not militant. And so it's not the biohacker center, although you can be as optimized as you want. And it's not the '70s style bathhouse either, where it may make a lot of people uncomfortable. Our food and beverage program is the mostly adaptogens on the beverage side, so we're not doing alcohol. But there will be mood directional
Okay.
beverages that can take you, kind of, sort of lift you up if that's you're feeling you need to be a little bit chattier, or mellow you out if you want to just kind of come down, whether that's CBD or lion's mane or whatever, or something neutral and balanced. And then the food will draw from some of the foodways of turkey, and we'll have some caviar as a nod to Russian culture,
Thank you.
and um, it'll be done in a modernist way. And as a chef, I put a lot of value and emphasis on food's role in not just in gathering, but wellness and joy. And because everything that we do is meant to bring people together, on the food side, we'll do some ceremonial cooking, whether it's massive paella or massive tagine, where people are invited to kind of stand around and get involved, and then almost serve yourself. So very relaxed, almost backyard style. And then a lot of the programming will make this space also, so that we're cultivating community, and and creating something that can only be experienced in real life.
This is opening early 2026 in Miami.
Yeah, we're looking at March in Miami, just on the edge of Wynwood and Midtown Edgewater area. So it's the Nomad Hotel is opening across the way from us, and a lot of Wynwood is moving in that direction towards Edgewater and Midtown, which is less. Yeah, it's a different vibe than what maybe Wynwood started as, which is a lot of head shops and bars and what have you. This is almost a remedy to that.
I see a lot of similarities between this project and Tender Greens in that you are very conscious about the decisions you make around the values that you attribute to your work and allowing this opportunity to put something out into the world that is non-pretentious and can be experienced by a variety of people. I think that that is very tough to execute. And if you can do something like that, it's going to be a magical experience. And then also using food as medicine, as fuel, as gathering. I find that to be also extremely beautiful as well. So I'm very excited to see where this goes. And to close this episode off, I just want to say a big thank you for coming on and telling your story. I think that there is a ton for me to digest as someone that is, building and trying to become a better friend, a better partner to my business partners, and to be just a better builder. So I hope my audience also finds something of value of your story. And maybe this is a good book plug, but you wrote a book about your journey with your founders on building Tender Greens. We'll put that in the description as well.
Yep.
For the folks that enjoyed this conversation, please check that out. So, Erik, thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.